Now, imagine being able to just sit down at your computer and just write code confidently, not question the code that you've written, no more looking up on Google and well, sometimes you use Stack Overflow, but you get the point I'm making. You're not just copying from ChatGPT, you're not just endlessly Googling a problem, you're not just copying off of someone's tutorial on YouTube. You actually have the skills and the knowledge and the understanding to create and solve the problems. So very quickly, the purpose of this video is going to be to build a very basic HTML and CSS website page, and we're going to explain what HTML is. Now, HTML stands for the Hypertext Markup Language, and it's basically just the scaffolding, the building blocks of all websites, and it helps structure the data that's going to be presented on the website. Now, you're going to need a text editor in order to follow along with this tutorial. So you can use whatever you like. You could use Visual Studio itself, you could use the Notepad, you could use Notepad++. If you want to download Visual Studio, if it's not already set up on your computer, you can literally just go to code.visualstudio.com and you'll be able to download for either Windows. When we use HTML, we use the .html file extension. So I'm going to create a file here. It's going to be called index.html. And index.html is going to be like a route to our web page. It's going to be where, say for instance, we had an about section. We would have a folder called about, and inside of that about folder, we might have about.html. Now, we use index.html because it knows if there is no folder, there is no file path that it's looking for, it's just going to go to the index. We usually use this as a home page, and it's more of a matter of preference. I would suggest to use an index.html file, but I don't know if it's 100% necessary. Now, what I've added to the page now is referred to as the HTML boilerplate, and it's basically just the simple structure, the skeleton that all of our HTML websites or pages get loaded on. So at the top of the page here, you'll see this exclamation mark doctype HTML. Now, don't worry too much about this. All it's doing is it's just telling the file that it is a hypertext markup language file. Now, we use the HTML tags here, and notice this is something that I'm going to explain. So every single piece of data, like for instance this title, which says my first website, is stored inside of an opening and closing tag in HTML. These are the HTML tags. Notice that we have a HTML and then we have a /HTML because this is the closing tag. It encloses the data inside of the tag. And most HTML pages consist of a head. Now, well, a head and a body. And you can also have a footer. But what I'm going to explain is that when we use the head on the page, generally what we're doing is we're storing the style sheets as well as the scripts that we might use on the page. Now, style sheets I'll get into in a bit more depth later on in another video, but right now we're just going to be working with style tags, which contain cascading style sheets. Cascading style sheets are what we use to style the different HTML elements on the page. Now, say for instance you wanted a paragraph, or well, say for instance we wanted a header that says welcome to my website. We could go inside of the body and we could say my first website. And this is going to, there are multiple, I think it goes all the way to 6. you can go from H1 to H6, and it's just basically a heading tag. Notice the opening and closing tag, and it's a H1. Now we can use, this is a little plugin that I've downloaded, and that you will be able to download as well yourself, which shows a preview of the page. Notice that the H1, when I change it to a H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, doesn't go beyond 6, so I was right, there are 6. So there are 6 different sizes of header, and notice how it affects each one. Now, that's because of the preview. I've been very lucky there, but you would have to change both. So when I've got this H3 and a H1, that doesn't work. But what we'd have is a H3 and a H3, and that would work properly. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to add a paragraph. Now, if we want to add a paragraph to the page, we use the P tag, or the paragraph tag. So we could add in here, P, welcome to my first website. And when we add that, say for instance, we had a lot of text. So now I don't know if you noticed, but I've replaced it with some placeholder text. And notice how the lines will automatically fix themselves to the page. So this can be multi-line. So you can put a lot of text inside of a paragraph. So you'll notice that I've used this. I've changed the paragraph to hi, I'm Max, and this is my first web page. But what you'll see is that it says I ampersand RSQO semicolon M Max. Now, what is this? This is an example of a HTML entity. And the reason that this exists is because of reserved keywords. Now, reserved keywords generally, a lot of the time, are just keywords that would be used to code with, so they have a meaning in code. But right now, if I was sticking two different strings together, and I was, I don't know, pulling something from the server code and getting that to, I don't know, load dynamically on the page in this paragraph, my apostrophe on its own might cause a conflict with that. So that's why we've used this HTML entity instead, because the apostrophe is a reserved keyword. Now, looking at this page alone, it is very boring. It just says, my first website, hi, I'm Max, and this is my first web page. So we might actually want some content on here. So this is where I'm going to introduce you to the image tag. Now, an image tag is going to, as the name implies, store an image. And we are going to use a HTML attribute. Now, an attribute is basically just the different parameters that the HTML element are using. Basically, we take the URL or the file path for the image that we want to store, and we can give it some alternate text. An alternate text generally gets used for web readers. So if you were using a web crawler, it would look at the name of the HTML element and it would see that it's called HW3 schools. And you could also use this for blind people if they're using a screen reader, because the screen reader generally just reads the alt text. Now I'm going to introduce you to the div tag. The div tag is used to divide the different sections of the page. You literally just type div, and we have a closing tag. But I'm going to put the closing tag at the bottom of the body of our HTML. Well, in front of the end of the body. And we're going to give it a class called container. More on that later. class is just a way of classification. It allows you to access the different elements on the page. Oh, put it in the body tag. So instead, div is going to have a class of container, and inside of our class container we're going to have another div, but this one is going to have a class called content. And I want to create a list of my hobbies. So we want an unordered list, which would stand for UL. And that means that we have bullet points. If we wanted an ordered list, we could use OL. And OL would basically stick a number instead of a bullet point before. So I'll actually show that. So if we change this to OL, and oh, we can add inside of that now. If we have a look at that inside of our web preview, notice that the list goes down 1, 2, 3. Right. If I go into the code and I change it to UL, notice how it turns to bullet points. They've all gone bullet pointed. And that's the difference between an unordered and an ordered list. Now, last but not least, we have links. Now, when we add a link, we're going to use the A tag, a hypertext anchor. Now, it's going to use a href. Now, a href, if you don't want it to point to anything, can be blank. You can literally just have it blank and it would link to nothing. Notice how here you can click on it and it would redirect if there was a page to go to. And you can see at the very bottom of the page, but it disappears very quickly, that it actually displays the link to the URL that you're going to in the bottom left, which is quite handy. So if I just revert that back, to example.com. If I click there, it's actually going to take me to another page, which is opening somewhere else. And that should be it for the HTML side of this course. Now, I can hear you already saying, Max, this isn't really a proper website. It's literally just, welcome to my website, and this is my first website and my hobbies, and check out my favorite website. So if we wanted to style this, we would use cascading style sheets. So inside of the head tag, what we're going to do is we're going to place a style tag. Now, style tags are just the same as any HTML element. They have an opening and a closing tag. But inside of the style tag is going to contain the cascading style sheets code that we're going to use in order to style our different HTML elements. Now, the way that we can access the different HTML elements on our page is via the classes that we created for the different divs. Now, we can add classes to just about any HTML element and use this to target the HTML element. We can also use IDs, and I'll show you this in a bit. The way that we access an ID or a class is slightly different, but it's basically the same idea. An ID is generally going to be the name of an element, whereas a class could be something like, we could create classes and add them to the divs or different elements that we've created, and we could have something that makes the text go red, or it could add spacing to our page. So I'll go more in depth on this topic. So this is looking a bit bare bones basic so far. So we want our website to actually look nice. So we're going to start to style it. What we're going to use for this is cascading style sheets. So we start with an opening and closing style sheet at the top of the head tag in the page. The reason we put this in the head tag is because this is where it takes all of the data, like the metadata of style sheets, and any potential JavaScript files that we might want to add to the website. But we can also add scripts inside of the body, that's not a problem, and style sheets. So we're going to start out by creating some styling for the body. Now we can just directly access the body element. And the syntax is a little different in cascading style sheets. So we're going to access the body, and we're going to give it a, font, family, and we use a colon. And after the colon, we can put anything we'd like. So I could say Arial, and then we use a comma, and then we can use sans serif. Now, the reason I've done this, and there's two, is because if the computer doesn't have Arial as a font, then it can use sans serif. I apologize, sans serif as a backup, and it's good to have a backup option because not all browsers have compatibility for all fonts all of the time, and people on their phones and stuff like that might be missing out because they could have outdated browsers. You never know. So we've created sans serif as a backup. We can have multiple backups, and we always finish our style sheets code with a semicolon. So when we add an element to the body. So, for instance, we've said that the font family is Arial, Helvetica, or sans serif, and then we say font family, colon, then the actual styling with a semicolon to finish it off. And we're going to give it a background color. Remember to add the hyphen. And we're going to give it FO. That's going to give it a slightly grey appearance. And then we're going to add text align. And let's have it align in the center of the page. Brilliant. And then margin, we'll give it 20 pixels. Now the margin, what that's doing, if we bring it back, okay. It's not like padding where the margin is almost, well, it's like in a textbook, you'll have a margin to show the end of the page, but you can imagine inside of these different HTML elements, like this paragraph that says hi, I'm Max. If I highlight it, you can see that it's inside of a box. And basically, if we were to increase the size of the margin, it's exactly like it sounds. So the sides of this element will actually just increase in size, so they will become more filled out. And that means that other elements can, well, it just allows you to create depth with the different elements. So you could use a margin to show that this element is further away from another element. You could make it closer to another element, or you could add padding so that it fills it with a color or the text. Or but that's just for the body. Now let's have a look at the header. So we'll select our H1 element, and we're going to give it a color of how does that look? That's fine. But we could give it anything. We could make it blue if we wanted to. You even type just the colour green if we really wanted. Oh yeah, that's because we don't have H1 elements on the page. Never mind. Wrong. It's H2. And now notice how the H2 element on the page is just turned green. And if we wanted to access the H3 element, turn that green. We could actually, don't ever be scared of copying and pasting within your own code in an example like this, because we can just take that and we can make the H3 green, because we'll just change that to a 3. Ta-da! Now, I'm going to keep this as there we go. And then, what should we do now? We could attack the paragraphs. So we can just directly access the paragraph tags again. And this time we're going to give it a color of there we go, and then it's just making it slightly, it stands out more than the link does. Or even, let's see what that's like. No, I kind of like the other one. Yeah, yeah, we'll have it with that. And then let's say we wanted to target the actual link itself. Just use the A tag, and we could say that the color, and the color could just be blue. We don't have to use hexadecimal. The only reason that these are, because hexadecimal is 6-digit, so notice that these are only 3 digits. That's just because it's been shortened, because that would be hashtag 6666666, or hashtag 555555, and that's just been shortened down. So yeah, we can literally just say blue, and it would turn blue, or we could tell it to turn bloody, I don't know, red. Yeah, and you notice that the actual link itself turns red. And then let's get on to the interesting part. So there are different events that can happen when you're using the page. So we could access the A tag again, but we could say on A dot colon, hover. Let's make the color turn blue, and let's underline. So text decoration. And we'll say underline. Semicolon at the end. So now, when I go over to the link and I hover over it, nothing happens. That's not right. Let's make it Hmm. Give it a margin at the top. That's odd. But basically what should be happening there is when I hover over the element, it should change to the colour blue, and it should underline the element. Well, it's already underlined, so that's perhaps the problem. But we'll move on to a different example. Now is the interesting part. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be introducing the container tag. So remember before we created the classes, right? The classes allow us to access those divs and manipulate them using classes that we create inside of the cascading style sheets. So when we create a class, what I was talking about before is the way that it differs from an ID is that instead of using the hashtag, which we would use to select an ID, we're going to be using the dot for a class. Now, dot container, we're going to give it a background color of white. We're going to give it a padding of 20 pixels, a border radius of 10 pixels, and a box shadow of... Now, the way this works is it goes from top, bottom, left, and right, and we're giving it 10 pixels. And each one of these is a value inside of RGBA, and that gives the nice shadow around the sides of the box. And last but not least, we're going to have the content tag. Now, the content tag is just literally going to say margin at top. So the top margin, so the very end of the element, is going to be slightly thicker at the top, because we're going to set it to 20 pixels wide. And then we'll just notice that it moves slightly down. And then we can say that padding top is 20 pixels as well. And we'll just notice that it moves down slightly. And there we go. You've just created your first ever HTML and CSS web page. I know it's very basic. I know it's probably not what you were expecting to start with. But now, what I want you to do from here on out is I want you to keep making little projects like this. No longer are you going to keep going back to your tutorials. Stop watching tutorials. Stop it, all right? Actually start playing around with HTML code and CSS and actually get used to building your own web pages and understanding the different elements and playing around with it just like you would in Photoshop. It's not as difficult as it looks. Once you've watched this video, once you understand the basic concepts, go ahead, right? Look up anything you like, but implement it properly. Do not copy and paste. Actually learn things yourself. Go through the trial and error. Play around. There must be a ton of different little projects that you can create at first.